Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. It is currently 1:30 p.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. So you're sitting with a bunch of people, and you just keep talking about this and talking about that, and you're sharing your opinion about this, and you're sharing your opinion about that, and you're telling people why this is right or why this is wrong, and you just keep talking and talking and talking and talking, and finally someone looks at you, and they raise their voice, and they're like, "Why are you such a prating fool?" And you're like, whoa, what did you just call me? A prating fool. Prating? What could you spell that for me? And they're like, yeah, prating fool. Yeah, I will definitely spell it for you. Prating. And you may say, prating? Or do you mean prating? Prating? What are you talking about? And you get very offended because you know the full part is obviously, that's negative. You don't know what this prating thing is. You're like, okay, so why are you calling me a prating fool? What is a prating fool? And they start explaining it to you, and you find yourself getting very frustrated, very upset, very angry. And you may then decide, after they've explained or defined what a prating fool is, you may decide to let them really have it, and you may respond in a very loud way because you're now offended and you're angry. Has anyone ever called you a prating fool? Have you ever been, in a sense, convicted about being a prating fool by attending church and hearing a sermon on what a prating fool is? If I was to stop right now and say, take a piece of paper, write down your definition of a prating fool, write it out right now. Could you write out a detailed definition of what a prating fool is? Could you? How detailed would it be? Do you really understand it? Now, over the past, few weeks, it feels that I keep finding myself in the book of Proverbs over and over and over again. And I keep finding myself in the book of Proverbs because I guess I kind of have a strange relationship with the book of Proverbs. On one hand, the book of Proverbs absolutely fascinates me because everyone's like, the book of Proverbs, it's the book of wisdom. And if we read Proverbs and study Proverbs, then we can understand, we can obtain that wisdom. And with that wisdom, life will be much better when we're operating from a biblical wisdom, from a godly wisdom. Life will be better. We'll make better choices. We won't find ourselves in complicated situations, and we could avoid pain and suffering and this and that. And I'm like, okay, so on one hand, yes, I want that wisdom because I want to avoid all the negative things that come in life when you're not operating from a wise perspective. So on one hand, I've always been fascinated by it. Like, could this be the book that gives me, the wisdom that I need, so I'll stop making such foolish decisions and stop doing, ridiculous things? On one hand, I've read and studied it many times, and I don't know if I can just say, now I've got it all figured out. I don't know if you just magically get that wisdom from simply reading and studying the book. It obviously can't hurt, but I've always been fascinated from that perspective. On the other hand, I've been always fascinated and somewhat confused by the book of Proverbs because I'm like, wait a minute. So the book of Proverbs is written supposedly by the wisest man who ever lived, or a large portion of it. And yet that's the man who dies as a serial adulterer, a serial polygamist, and an idolater. I don't know if I should be taking, advice on wisdom from him, but then I can be like, wait a minute. God obviously inspired the scriptures. So why would God use a man who by the end of his life, nobody's going to say, there lies the wisest man. You may walk by and go, there lies the man who was the greatest fool. So that fascinates me. Why? Why did it choose that man? And then I'm always fascinated. Now, early on in my Christian life, I didn't understand this. I had a completely kind of different understanding of human depravity. I don't know if I even really grasped what it was. But as I've grown and my understanding and have completely rejected, Pelagianism, I reject that completely and believe in the presence of the fallen nature before salvation and even after salvation, believing it's still there and it's going to be there until glorification. Then I now struggle. I'm fascinated with Proverbs. I'm like, well, how does this wisdom work with a sinful nature? Because I believe our sinful nature, by nature, it's naturally going to go against the wisdom found in the book of Proverbs. It's going to go against biblical wisdom. It's going to go against godly wisdom. So if I obtain biblical wisdom in my mind, right? I know what it is. I know what it should do, and I know how it should operate. How does that work against the nature that's going to go against it? Because the nature, it impacts the thinking, but it also impacts emotions and feelings. And what does that battle look like? And I don't have it clearly mapped out in any way, shape, or form. So in some ways, the book of Proverbs always fascinates me, but there's always a part of me that still thinks, I know that I do this and I do that and I think this way and I see all of my weaknesses and my failures and I know that I'm forever confronted with my own failings, shortcomings, weaknesses, mess ups, sin. We could talk all day about all of the issues I know that are present in my life, and don't act like you're so spiritual, because I guarantee you they're in you as well. So then there's always this okay, so I need Proverbs because I need to fight against this. But then at times I'm like, but why do we have such difficulty and really taking this wisdom and it really becoming ours? I was very frustrated as the church in the United States of America was right there entering in to the whole COVID pandemic. Restrictions, no restrictions, mask, no mask. What are we going to do? In person, not in person? Are people going to come to the parking lot and listen to this? All the different things churches were trying to do. One of the things I was concerned about is that we would start operating more so from a worldly wisdom, from a worldly perspective, from a fleshly perspective, from a political perspective, that we would not approach the entire pandemic from a biblical wisdom perspective, right? And so I was like, hey, everyone, we're going to spend this time studying the book of Proverbs. And I really tried to emphasize Proverbs to prepare people for it. And then I sat back and watched the American church. It's almost like the American church was like, I'm holding a box of pencils here. Hey, this is wisdom. This is biblical wisdom found in Proverbs and found throughout the Bible. Okay, now we have this global pandemic in front of us. Let's take wisdom and let's just throw it so far away that we'll never find it again. In fact, let's take this box of wisdom and burn it completely down and bury the ashes and then drop a mountain on top of the ashes and then have it blown up with a nuclear. I felt like that I know that's like hyperbole, but I'm trying to get a point across. We just threw it away. And I feel that the church operated under every concept other than biblical wisdom that may be found in the book of Proverbs. So I've lately been drawn back to it, right? I've done like a devotional message. I preached a sermon on Proverbs chapter 9. I've been really just trying to go back to it. So this morning, as I was sitting here trying to figure out what to do, I was like, well, let me just start reading in the book of Proverbs. And I found myself in Proverbs chapter 10. And in the Bible that I happen to have open, they have kind of like these little, chapter headings and subheadings, right? So we just finished Proverbs 9 at Victory Baptist Church. You can go listen to my sermon on it. I think I did relatively okay. There's definitely some things I didn't do right in the sermon, but I think walking through it the way we did, I thought it was interesting and I thought it provided something. So I'm like, well, since I just preached Proverbs chapter 9, let me just start reading Proverbs chapter 10. The first heading here is a wise son gathers in summer. I'm like, okay, well, summer's about to begin. And here in Texas, it's already here, at least temperature wise. Okay. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I will read that. And so I got ready to start reading that. And then I looked down and then I saw the word A. And this is like another heading in chapter 10, A, Prating. A prating. And I'm like, prating. Okay. All right. I know I've preached on this before, but I'm like, what do I remember about what a prating? And then the next, I'll just read the whole thing. A prating fool shall fall. I'm like, okay, well, if this is, again, many times within Proverbs, it gives kind of general concepts, but they're stated in very dogmatic ways. And we always have to understand when it's just a general principle. But the general principle here is that if you are a prating fool, you shall fall. If you are a prating fool, you shall fall. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to fall. So I don't want to be a prating fool. I'm like, well, I know what I'll do. Let's just look up some things about what a prating fool is. And then we'll just kind of put together kind of a little devotional message and get people thinking about what a prating fool is or isn't. Right? So I started doing a little bit of work on what a prating fool is. First, I had to listen to a lot of different ways because I think I've heard some pastors pronounce it a prating fool, okay? But I think prating is the correct way. You can correct me if I'm incorrect, but I think prating is the correct way, all right? So I am like, okay, well, let me look up some things. So I started doing some work, and I found first this. In the book of Proverbs, a prating fool is often described as someone who talks incessantly. And I'm like, oh no. Okay. A prating fool is someone who talks incessantly. And I'm sitting here looking at that while I'm looking at my microphone. And I'm like, well, okay. Maybe I'm just going to skip this, right? Because if a prating fool is someone who talks incessantly, that could literally be described by me. I mean, look at how many thousands upon thousands of hours of content is posted of me sitting in front of a microphone talking. I've been broadcasting, preaching, teaching, 30 years? Okay. I've been broadcasting in any format that was available to me, whether making cassettes on Christian radio, podcasting, you name it, right? So I'm like, man, I've been incessantly talking for 30 years. Okay. I'm like, oh boy, hopefully there's more than someone who just talks incessantly, right? But it goes on. Someone who talks incessantly lacks wisdom. So maybe this is a person who talks incessantly, but they're talking incessantly, but they lack wisdom. Now, here's the thing. I talk incessantly, at least when it comes to broadcasting. Maybe in other times I'm pretty quiet. I don't know. People could debate that. I mean, how you perceive yourself is maybe not the way other people perceive you. I do know this, that even people who know me and they ask me a question, they typically say, well, can you give us the short answer? Because I typically will go on and on and on. Now, sometimes I won't say anything unless I'm asked a question. Let's just say I talk incessantly, but lacks wisdom. So this would be someone who talks incessantly, but they do so lacking wisdom. So it means all of those words are not sharing wisdom. They're sharing the opposite of wisdom, which would be foolishness, right? So a prating fool would be someone who talks incessantly, but they lack wisdom. So all of the talking is just foolishness. Now, I would like to think that my talking incessantly is because I have so much wisdom to share. But then that may go to the problem of pride and being self-deceived, because I think we all have a tendency to think that when we speak, that there's a reason why we're speaking. Someone needs to hear what I have to say. I mean, come on. All the times you talk when you're talking to your kids, it's because you think you have something they need to hear. When you're talking to your spouse, it's because you think you have something that they need to hear, or you want to be heard. You think your words should be heard. You think your words should be respected, that people should listen to you. They should pay attention to you because there's something about us that thinks I'm speaking, so I should be listened to, respected, and heard. But why do we think we need to be respected, listened to, and heard? Obviously, we believe our words have some intrinsic value to them, right? But I wonder, is that a pride problem? I mean, remember, our sinful nature at its very core is narcissistic. If every human being is narcissistic at their very core, no matter how they may try to hide that narcissism. They may try to hide that narcissism and doing good things, but it's still there. So a prating fool is someone who talks incessantly. Okay, check. I got that. Lacks wisdom. Well, I definitely know I lack wisdom. I mean, come on. Does anyone walk around going, I'm wise. I'm the wise one. Listen to me. I have wisdom. I think if you start thinking you have wisdom, it's probably a good sign that probably you don't have wisdom. I mean, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? Okay. All right. So spreads folly. Well, obviously, if you're talking incessantly and you don't have wisdom, you're going to be spreading folly, and you're going to be spreading folly with your words. And that's kind of the definition I have from at least one source. So a prating fool is often, I always want to say prating. A prating fool is, I go back and forth on how I want to say it. A prating fool, sometimes I want to say prating, sometimes I want to say prating, but all right. A prating fool is someone who talks incessantly, lacks wisdom, spreads folly with their words, and that's kind of the basic definition. Now, if I look up some idea, if I go to the Cambridge English Dictionary, to talk stupidly, this is from Cambridge Dictionary, to talk stupidly or about things that are not important for a long time. Okay. Inevitably, there's some, this is just a sentence, inevitably there's some caller prating on about the decline in moral standards. Someone goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Now, some could say, well, that's talking about something that's important, right? But again, who gets to determine if it's important or not important? When we talk, we think what we say is important. We always do. Sometimes I struggle with that myself, right? I'll get done with a broadcast and I'll be like, man, I went 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Was there any really importance in what I said? Did it really matter? Like, am I convincing myself that what I'm doing is significant, that what I'm doing is important? Do I sit here in front of this microphone self-deceived and thinking that I am doing something of great significance? Am I nothing more than a prating fool? I don't know. If I look up some other definitions here, hang on, let me look up some others. If I look up, I'm gonna look up more from a biblical perspective. To talk for a long time, and more specifically, to talk without wait for a long time. The intoxicated are usually guilty of prating about nonsense. All right. So, and if we look up this is from a Bible dictionary, babbling, chattering. The wise, and so then it quotes from some scriptures, but we'll look at those scriptures in a minute. But it's babbling, chattering. Do we talk? And maybe we shouldn't. Is it the wise person that knows when to talk and the fool doesn't know? Is a prating fool that person who just doesn't know when to be quiet, just talks. Well, let's look at some scriptures. Now, I think there's three scriptures I think that actually uses the word prating in the King James. I think two of them are in Proverbs 10 and the other one is in 3 John. We're not going to look at the 3 John one. You can look at it, I think it's verse 10 in 3 John. You can look at it, and it's speaking about an individual who goes about prating, talking, running their mouth. All right. But let's just look at them in Proverbs 10. And I think that this will give us at least a start. All right. Let's start in verse 8. Proverbs 10:8. The wise in heart will receive commandments. The wise in heart will receive commandments. And I think the idea is the wise in heart understands the commandments, the instructions, especially from God, that we have to receive them. We may not like them. We may not want them, but we have to receive them. Now, we can get into it. We do know, and we can never forget this, that no matter how many of those commandments we receive and we accept and we acknowledge, we're never going to fully obey them. We're never going to, because we cannot obey the commandments. We cannot not obey God's law. So we always have to make sure we draw that distinction, right? Like, as a Christian, I know Christians, I know they constantly deny this reality, because Christians like to believe when you become a Christian, dun, 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 you become a superhero, and you now can obey the law of God, and you can say no to sin. But that's just ridiculous. You cannot. You have a sinful nature, therefore you'll never obey the commandments, ever. As much as you say, I'm obeying the commandments, you may be obeying it externally. You may even be obeying it by avoiding certain practices, but internally, you are violating them over and over and over and over and over. So the idea, though, is at least a wise person will at least receive the commandments. We're saying, this is good, this is right, this is the way it should be, this is what I should pursue. You're at least receiving it. You're acknowledging, hey, I don't like it and I don't even want it, but you're at least receiving it. You're not trying to make up trying to get around it. But a prating fool shall fall. A prating fool shall fall. Now, I think the contrast here is that the wise man will receive the commandments, but the prating fool, they're not even going to listen. They're just going to keep talking. And all of their talking may have nothing to do with the command, may not even be listening to the command, and they're going to fall. They talk around it, they talk under it, they talk over it, and they're just going to fall. Now, let's go to Proverbs 10:10. He that winketh with his eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. Now, this is interesting, because this is almost comparing, like, the first one is comparing like a positive to a negative. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but the prating fool shall fall. This one seems two negatives, right? He that winketh with his eye causeth sorrow, but the prating fool shall fall. That, hey, the one that winks with his eye, he's going to cause pain, he's going to cause sorrow, but the prating fool will completely fall. It seems to be now comparing two negatives, which is kind of interesting. So I did a little work on the Proverbs 10:10 one, looking up different concepts. And most say that Proverbs 10:10 contrasts two types of behavior, but I think it's contrasting two negative behaviors. The winking with the eye, in some context, winking with an eye can be a gesture of deceit or mischief. The act of winking in this verse symbolizes insincerity or deceitful communication. The implication is that causing sorrow or trouble through deceitful actions will have negative consequences. Hey, the person who's winking the eye, who's using deception, is going to cause some sorrow. But the prating fool refers to someone who talks excessively, speaks foolishly without considering the consequences of their words. This type of person spreads folly and misinformation. This verse conveys the idea that both deceitful actions and foolish speech leads to negative outcomes. It warns against causing harm through deceitful foolishness, highlighting the importance of honesty, wisdom, and communication. But I think it's like, hey, the one who winks with the eye may cause sorrow, but hey, the prating fool completely going to fall. So I think, and you've got two verses that seems to say the prating fool's going to fall. Now, in other words, the prating fool, if you compare the prating fool against something positive, or you compare the prating fool against something negative, it's the end result is the prating fool is going to completely fall. Now, I'm going to look something up. I did not think about doing this, but I'm going to go to the Blue Letter Bible app, right? And I'm going to go to 10:8. I'm going to pull up the interlinear. I did not even think about this. Fall. All right. It's the same Hebrew word in both 10:8 and 10:10. The Hebrew word is this, if I can find it here. The Hebrew word is this.
Strong's H3832. Lavat. Lavat.
Now, the Hebrew word here means, to overthrow, to fall. To throw down, thrust out, thrust away. To be thrust down, to be thrust away, to be thrown down, to be cast aside. The prating fool is just going to be thrown down, cast aside. They're going to be overthrown. In other words, it sounds like that the prating fool is headed for some kind of destruction. And I think the prating fool is heading to some kind of destruction because it's almost like this. If you take the two together, you've got the commandments and you've got someone using deceit. The prating fool, no matter what they're confronted with, something positive or with something negative, the prating fool just doesn't listen. And in a sense, they're just talking. They're like moving forward, talking. Won't listen. Spreading folly. Probably thinking that everything they're saying is so wise and so smart. And then boom, and then boom, they fall off. They walk right off the edge. They walk right over the edge. They walk right over the cliff. Because they won't listen. They're not paying any attention. They just can't stop talking. So I think maybe the question should be, I know it is at least partial question. Are you a prating fool? Am I a prating fool? Now, I've already said, I think that there's clearly I talk incessantly, so I already have one check. And then, well, I know I'm not wise, so I know that's a second. So maybe I am. But the question is, are you a prating fool? And then I'll ask it this way. How good of a listener are you? The prating fool doesn't listen. He just talks. How good do you really listen? How good do you really hear? Are you and to be a great listener means you not only hear what's being said, you try to understand the emotion leading to what's being said. You really hear, you see, I think to be a good listener, you not only hear words, you hear the emotions. Not only do you hear the emotion, you hear the other perspective. You feel the other perspective. You understand it. To be a good listener, sometimes all we do is we hear something, and as soon as we don't like it, boom, we're ready to respond. Whoa. Are you really listening? Because sometimes we are so committed to our way, our thinking, and our agenda that nothing else matters than what we want. And we don't care about anybody. We don't care about anything. Give me what I want. And if I don't get what I want, I'm not going to listen. Because in some cases, we're a prating fool because we will not listen. We just keep talking. Now, according to one source, they put some other verses together. They kind of did some cross-referencing for the prating fool, and they put some verses together that doesn't actually use the term prating fool, and you can decide if you believe these verses work with this. All right, so we have Proverbs 10:8, the wise in heart will receive a commandment, but the prating fool shall fall. Going to be overthrown. Why? Not going to listen. Proverbs 10:10, he that winketh with an eye is going to cause sorrow, but the prating fool shall fall. Again, compared to either something positive or negative, the prating fool is going to end up in the same place. But then they add this one, Proverbs 10:14. Wise men lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. Hey, let me read that to you again, because I think it adds, you can tell me whether you think it adds to it or not. But a wise man lays up knowledge. See, the wise man is going to do less talking and more gaining that knowledge, obtaining that knowledge. But the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The mouth of the foolish, it just talks and talks and talks and talks. How about 10:18? He that hideth hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. So you got the idea, the one that hides hatred with lying lips. So he really hates, but he's going to hide it with his lying lips. And he that uttereth a slander is a fool. The prating fool will utter a slander. He just can't stop talking, or she cannot stop talking. They cannot stop talking. How about Proverbs 12:23? Proverbs 12:23. We read these words. A prudent man concealeth knowledge, but the heart of a fool proclaim foolishness. See, a prudent man knows, I'm just going to conceal this. I'm not going to necessarily tell everyone what I know or don't know because maybe they don't need to know. Maybe it's not going to do any good. I mean, what good is it going to do? Sometimes the only good we're hoping to do by sharing something is for our own self-satisfaction, our own ego or revenge or whatever. It's just what we want. But a prudent man will be like, no, I'm going to conceal this. I'm not going to share what I know. But the heart of a fool proclaimeth foolishness. That's a prating fool. It can't stop itself. It's just going to talk and talk and talk and talk. But I think the prating fool always thinks that what they're saying is so wise. I always think that there's more to what they have to say than what other people have to say. How about Proverbs 13:3? He that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. Hey, the one that opens his lips shall have destruction. The one who constantly talks finds themselves in destruction. They destroy everything around them. A prating fool just can't stop babbling. How about Proverbs 15:2? The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouth of the fool, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. The mouth of a fool just pours it out. Just pours it out. They don't even the prating fool doesn't like have like a little cup where it just like a little bit here. They just pour. They just take the whole bucket and just dump it out. All of their foolishness. Just let it go. And sometimes the more, and I think we live in a culture that almost celebrates the prating fool. It's called social media. Everyone gets to comment about everyone, and everyone is an expert on everything. Everyone thinks that their opinion should be heard. And forget social media. Just go to you can go to Yahoo, and when they have the news articles, there's always the comments under. Just look on Yahoo, look at the comments underneath those news articles. Insanity. Go to the Christian Post, read the comments under their articles. Insanity. And everyone just says, they think they're right, they think they're right, they think they're right. Prating fool after prating fool they babble, but in this case, it's not with words, it's with words, but it's words typed out on a screen. Post, reply, because we think everything we know is the most important and our opinion is most important and we should be heard. Or maybe sometimes the wise thing to do, the prudent thing is to do, just to be quiet. Now, look, that's easy for me to say because I have a hard time. I try not to read comments, but if I read comments, I have a tendency to jump right into the middle of it. And I try not to. But you know what that demonstrates? It doesn't demonstrate necessarily that I'm wise. It demonstrates that I may have the heart of a prating fool because I feel like I need to talk and I need to interject and I need to. Now look, I feel there's a time you have to correct things. I think times things you have to confront things. So there's always wisdom here. Proverbs 18. Proverbs 18. Now you can tell me if you think these scriptures work or not work. In Proverbs 18, I think verse 6, a fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calleth for strokes. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. See, a fool will enter into contention. And sometimes his mouth just gets him into trouble. It says his mouth calls for strokes. It calls for some kind of something negative to happen. Sometimes you got to just know, there's no point. There's just no point. There's just no point. There's no point in entering into this conversation. It's not going to go anywhere. A prating fool doesn't ever think that. Just talks. Proverbs 29:11. Now, again, these verses don't use the word prating, but I think the concept is here. At least I believe. You can tell me if you disagree. All right, Proverbs 29:11. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it until afterwards. A fool utters every thought, everything. It's gotta go. How about just know when to be quiet? Just know when to stop talking. I wonder how much time as Christians we spend time talking to God, talking about God, talking for God, talking about the scriptures, and how much time we spend actually listening to God, listening to his word, thinking about it. How much time do we talk about what we think about it? We talk about what we feel about it. We talk about how we're going to ignore it. We talk about what we are going to do, what we think, what we want, what our plans. How about we just stop talking and just try to go, okay, here's what God says. Proverbs paints a picture of a prating fool as someone who lacks discretion, speaks without wisdom, causes trouble with their words, and ultimately faces negative consequences due to their foolish speech. The contrast is often drawn between the wise who uses their words carefully and the fool who speaks recklessly and brings harm upon themselves and others. So today, if you're talking to your kids, talking to your spouse, talking to some friends, and someone's like, "You prating fool," you may go, "Oh, wow, that hurt." Okay, can you just take the knife out now and go away because that hurt? Because now you know what a prating fool is. Now, what we would want to do is discover that we are a prating fool before someone else has to point it out. Are you a prating fool today? But I think the second question is, do we really listen to people? Do we really listen to God? Look, if we're living the Christian life and we just have our own agenda, our own way and our own will, and we're just going to go along with our own agenda, our own way and our own will, and we don't really care what God says, then, maybe we should just stop pretending. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe at that point, just say, you know what, God, I'm just going to do whatever I want. So either we have to decide we're going to try to follow what God wants, or we're just going to do what we want. And at some point, we just got to stop pretending. But do we listen to people? Do we really listen? It's hard to listen when all you care about is what you feel, what you want, what you think, and what you desire. Are other people only there to give you what you want? Like, sometimes we only talk to people because we want to be heard. We want them to hear us. We want them to respond affirmatively, that we want to hear that we're smart, we're great, we want to be heard by them. We want them to give us the right response, but we really don't care what they have to say. Other people are just a tool for us. All right. I would love to get your thoughts on this Wednesday, May the 22nd. I would love for you to email me your words, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. I was greatly concerned about doing this broadcast. I was trying to hurry as fast as I can. Maybe at the beginning I was talking a little too fast. But it's the day the yard guy comes. So I was like, I've been sitting here waiting and waiting and waiting, going, do I do something? Do I not do something? And then 1 hour turns into another. And then I start getting frustrated because I'm wasting time. When is he going to show up? When is he not going to show up? So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do so. Now, if he would have shown up, then I would have felt like I'm the fool, because now I just have to delete everything, because once they start cutting the grass, it's way too loud up here to publish that broadcast. But we made it. We made it through it. So, but guess what? The irony of it is I just spent 39 minutes talking. So did I just demonstrate that I'm a prating fool? Now, I don't think, just to make sure we have this, when we deal with these things in Scripture, there's always a balance. Obviously, I don't think if someone talks a lot, that immediately makes them a prating fool. right? You can be a fool and just not a prating one, right? You can be quiet and hide your foolishness. You can still, just because one talks all the time does not make them a prating fool. Just because someone is quiet doesn't necessarily make them wise. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But hey, I think we can definitely consider how much we talk and what we're actually saying. And why do we think everyone needs to hear what we have to say? Why do I think anyone needs to hear what I have to say? I mean, I struggle with that all the time. That's why I constantly think, I should just stop the podcast. It's not, what am I doing? What am I doing? Am I talking for other people's benefit or am I talking for my own? See, there's a lot of motivations come into play here. All right. newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. Everyone have a wonderful day. God bless.